I've just now started recording. So if everybody can put their mute on, that would be great. And some of you have been talking with Michael Fortunato. On my screen, he's in the upper right-hand part of my screen, but he's got the purple shirt on. And Michael and I met, I don't know how long, it was maybe 5 years ago or so. I don't know. We were both at a conference in Waco. It was a rural conference, and we've just sort of kept in touch, you know, through the years. And he does a lot of work with rural communities and entrepreneurs and so forth. And so, Michael, I'll let you kind of give us more background about who you are and maybe what Creative Insight is and what it is that you do. And then as far as having a formal presentation, whatever you're comfortable with is fine with us. You can do the share screen thing if you want, or if you just want to talk and bounce off of what you do and the experiences. We've found that, well, maybe a lot of times refer to this as training, but at the same time, the power of story is what we tend to hear and remember the most. And I'm sure that you've got a lot of that as well. But we kind of build you with that title, the not so secret synergy between communities and entrepreneurs. And so as a topic base, that's kind of what, you know, kind of what we'll be listening for. So go ahead and lead us off.
Sounds great, Mike, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's really great to meet you all. I'm Michael Fortunato. I'm a founding partner with a group called Creative Insight Community Development. I am an entrepreneur, and I am also and I have been involved in entrepreneurial ventures since I was growing up. I think I started my first business when I was 22, 23 years old. And I bounced in and out of entrepreneurship and also academic work. So it's been a weird path to walk, and it's given me some really unusual perspectives on entrepreneurship along the way. And you know, today I think it's going to be a little different from what Mike tells me. First of all, I'm going to promote Mike and Linda a lot and what they're doing, because it's I wish this was happening everywhere. That's actually what you do every week when you get together like this is the point of my talk. This is something that really matters in communities. I wish it were happening more often. But by my profession, I am a community and economic developer. And since I have a specialty and most of my research and experience is working in and around small businesses, I tend to look at the small business picture a little bit differently. I tend to work with communities that are struggling. They're usually rural areas and small towns. We're getting more and more into like dying suburbs and stuff like that recently. But you know, I fell in love with rural areas. I grew up in cities. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania originally. You can probably tell by the dialect. And it's interesting because I grew up in large cities. I lived in New York City for a long time, fell in love with rural areas while I was living in Manhattan, and I was traveling around with my first business. And I saw all the beautiful little towns in the Northeast, and I thought, why aren't these places having a revolution of entrepreneurs flooding these places? And, you know, all I saw were dying main streets. And I remember walking around and, you know, I saw this beautiful granite building right on the main street of this gorgeous town in northeastern Pennsylvania. And they said, hey, you want this building? It's for sale. I said, oh, I couldn't afford a building like that. You know, I'm whatever, it's not possible. They said, well, we'll give it to you for $20,000. I knew people that were paying twice that much every month for prime rent space in Soho for their business. I mean, it was incredible. So for me, to actually see, and I became obsessed with this idea of why aren't people moving into these smaller places, smaller cities, even cities the size of Abilene, and really making things happen. So I went back to school to find out. You know, I had a great run with my first business. I broke even, wonderful first experience. It was in the entertainment industry. That's a whole long story about that. You know, I ended up going back to school at Penn State University. Got my, went all the way for a doctorate degree because they just kept throwing me opportunities. So why not? And did a lot of community-based work the entire time. I was on the ground. And, you know, in Pennsylvania especially. And then I moved down to Texas, where I was served as the director for the Center of Rural Studies at San Diego State University, which is why I'm in Huntsville. So I did community-based work across the state, oftentimes talking about entrepreneurs. And the question, but I'm working mostly with governments, nonprofits, and organizations, and they're looking at it from a different angle. They're saying, how do we get more entrepreneurs in our community? And it started me on this whole series of research to understand why some places have lots and lots of entrepreneurs and other places don't. Some of the answers are really obvious. For example, big cities, if we talk about large urban areas, it's kind of easy to understand why that's the case, because it's, you know, a lot of times there's a lot of businesses that want to be connected. They want to be around their suppliers, their buyers, their, you know, they want to be kind of in the mix, and they get a lot of value add from spending the extra money being in a big city. But if you travel to smaller cities and little towns, some of them have lots and lots of entrepreneurs. Others don't. And if you look at the normal stuff that would predict that, it's very hard to tell why this place is very entrepreneurial and why this place isn't. So I started to research. I said, there must be another answer we're not accounting for. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information. First, we'll get into I may not get to all of the slides, and that's fine. I might just kind of skip through some stuff. I want to tell some stories, and I also would love to hear about your experiences too with your community. And that's the question I want to ask right off the bat. What makes your community a great place to do business in, and what makes it kind of a tough place to do business in? All right, so I'm going to try sharing my screen here. Let's see how this goes. Oh boy, here we are. Okay, can you all see this?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we'll talk about the not so secret synergy between entrepreneurs and communities. I'm also giving a shout out to my colleague Morgan Clevenger at Shippensburg University, who's also been along on part of this journey into exploring these questions. All right, so here's the issue, is that, you know, within the United States, we tend to think about entrepreneurs as being a very individualistic endeavor. You're a pioneer. It's about your idea and making a difference and meeting the market and creating value for your customers. What a wonderful thing. But we also have to recognize that while this is absolutely true, this was the focus of most of the research on entrepreneurship going all the way into the mid-90s. And we found very, very quickly that this is a very American way of looking at entrepreneurship. Makes sense. We're in the United States. This is how we oftentimes look at it. We think about individual businesses doing individual things. That's great. But there's more to the picture. We also know that entrepreneurs never start businesses alone, technically. They always have some sort of help or some sort of support or people to bounce ideas off of. So entrepreneurs also need cultural and human support. They need an ethic of collaboration, a minimal amount of resistance. You can probably all relate to this, right? You know, just, there are so many things that drag you down as an entrepreneur, you know, bureaucracy and red tape and tax and all kinds of stuff. So you want a minimal amount of resistance. And there's also a lot of process elements that apply at the group level, you know, like how do entrepreneurs get along with each other? Or how do entrepreneurs get along with institutions and leaders within the community? That makes a big difference too. Are they constantly getting feedback that they're crazy and why are they doing this? Or are they getting feedback that's very positive and encouraging? these make a big difference in shaping whether or not people even see it as possible to start a new company, which is exciting. It's really like, it makes you recognize like there are factors out there that that actually really influence how, you know, whether or not a place has a lot of entrepreneurs or not. A lot of it has to do with the culture. So in terms of the culture, you know, what are we talking about when we talk about culture? We're talking about habits. We're talking about social norms. We're talking about the presence of role models. That's going to become an important conversation in one of the stories I'm going to tell you. Role models are sometimes what we also call tacit knowledge. This is the knowledge of role modeling. It's stuff you learn from the people around you. Very interesting. The single greatest predictor of whether or not somebody becomes an entrepreneur, there are very few personality traits that predict it. The single biggest predictor is whether or not you have parents and close friends that are entrepreneurs. Because we know that entrepreneurial knowledge, you can learn it in school, but it really hits home once you have a chance to role model somebody. It's extremely important. So if there aren't many role models, there aren't many entrepreneurs. It also has to do with your priorities or values. If the local culture tells you you should go out and get a job, you're probably not going to have many entrepreneurs because everybody's going to think you're crazy. Well, why would you start your own business? You should just get a job. Everybody else is doing it. It's true. It also has to do with the community's vision of progress. What does that word even mean? Does that word mean progress that we stick with the businesses that are already established? We try to fit in, we try to conform to the local culture? Or does it mean that we stand out and try to do new things? We try to be innovative and we see that as being valuable within the culture. So these are things that we oftentimes don't talk about as entrepreneurs. We talk about business strategy, decision-making, we talk about capitalization, we talk about all the normal stuff, business planning, finding customers, all of it's important. Underneath it is this ambient noise about what constitutes a healthy entrepreneurial environment and community. A lot of that is social in nature. It's interesting. So a term we're hearing a lot now is ecosystem and ecosystem building. I am pleased to tell you that you are doing this already. This is proof, right? What we have going on right now, this is proof that you actually have an ecosystem. It has to do with the culture and the identity that occurs when you all get together as a group. I want to talk about that a little bit more. Here's this guy named Phil Auerswald. He's actually, there's a lot of research and buzz out there about entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial ecosystems at the moment. Personally, I'm fairly critical of a lot of it because some of the conversations that are out there, you know, it's sort of becoming a buzzword for any time entrepreneurs and institutions get together. And it's a lot more than that. It's much deeper and it's much more complex, but it makes a lot of sense. What we're finding is that entrepreneurial places tend to be, get ready for it, great places already. Most entrepreneurs that are starting businesses in a particular place are attracted to the place first, and then eventually build up the networks and the connections necessary to start a business. So when I'm working with a lot of communities, and they're like, how do we get entrepreneurs in here to make this place great? I said, you have to focus on being great first. And you might want to focus on those entrepreneurs that are already in the community and supporting them if you want to bring more people into the community. Because oftentimes they're saying, how do we get this entrepreneurial energy? But they're not recognizing that there's already entrepreneurial energy right there in front of them. And this happens quite a lot. So we're finding that once people start to come in, if entrepreneurs start to get together with one another and their institutions in a strategic way, we start to find that there are what we call leaders and feeders. Leaders are the entrepreneurs. They're the ones that go out and make the entrepreneurial economy happen. Feeders are the support networks. These are people, anybody from banks to universities to even high schools to, it could be a chamber of commerce or small business organizations or downtown groups or all kinds. It looks different everywhere you go. The question is, which of these groups are tuned into what you are doing as entrepreneurs? And which ones do you see as natural natural allies? Or maybe which ones do you see as natural enemies? You know, the interesting thing here is that all of these groups can create something we call communities of dis-entrepreneurship. There are some institutions that actually discourage entrepreneurship, even though they may not even think that they're doing it. One of my favorite stories is that, you know, I was in a little town in north central Pennsylvania, and this town was very involved in the powdered metal industry. And I was talking with an entrepreneur that opened a fitness center, and she said, you know, I've been open for 2 years now. And in this small town, the Chamber of Commerce has never come to visit me even once. That would have been bad enough. The problem was, not only was the Chamber of Commerce next door, but they were next door in the same enclosed building. There wasn't even a front door separating the place. It was like a mall, and you could just walk right in and around it. They never even stopped by. They were too busy, as this entrepreneur said, involved with the powdered metal industry. Really interesting stuff. So that's an example of a community of dis-entrepreneurship. Your institutions ignore entrepreneurs, and that can really have a suppressive effect. So this slide is what I like to call a horrendogram. It's not intended to be read right now. This is Babson, and this is what they've identified as the domains of the entrepreneurship ecosystem. The point here is, if you look across, there's all kinds of different elements. It's not just entrepreneurs. All of these things affect entrepreneurship locally. Policy, finance. Do you have access to capital? Do you have understanding bankers that are going to work with you? Culture. Do people even support entrepreneurs once they're in business, or do they keep going to chain stores and looking elsewhere for opportunities? Other kinds of supports like legal and accounting, are those even in your community? You know, believe it or not, the state of Nebraska has a critical shortage of lawyers. Something like 80% of their county, there aren't attorneys. Not even one. Not even a single attorney. That's incredible. I mean, this is great news for lawyers if you want to live in rural Nebraska. Human capital, markets, all of these things absolutely matter, and they make up the ecosystem. So entrepreneurship and what influences it on a local scale is a much wider range of inputs than just entrepreneurs themselves. All of these things affect how easy or how difficult it is to become an entrepreneur. And sometimes there can be some pretty serious barriers. I mean, they can be institutional or policy barriers. They could be physical barriers. You know, I remember when I was doing graduate work in central Pennsylvania, you know, the State College PA is in the middle of the state, and the town of Huntingdon's only 26 miles away. You never went to Huntingdon. There was a mountain in the way. And in the winter times of Pennsylvania, that made it very hard to get there. But it didn't matter. Even in the summertime, people had a mental block. We don't go there. Some people don't cross the tracks. Some people don't go to the next town over because of a football rivalry. There are all these weird things that kind of keep entrepreneurs from getting together effectively to talk local strategy and how to make the area a better place for entrepreneurs. And a lot of times, you know, knowledge systems are a big barrier too. Sometimes we don't have that tacit knowledge. We don't have those tacit entrepreneurs, those role models and those mentors that are out there that can actually help to do what Lyons and Lichtenstein call creating an entrepreneurial pipeline. Older entrepreneurs with experience helping out younger entrepreneurs who aren't experienced and helping them to get up and running, and creating a mentorship pipeline where we get together, we try to help each other out. To do that requires us not to see each other as competitors. We got to see each other as all being on the same teams. Co-opetition, I think, is the fancy word that people are using now. You know, but we can try to compete as a town or as a region together to make the entrepreneurship community stronger. I'm going to skip over this. This is kind of, you know, the stuff that we do in community development. There are multiple approaches. Facilitating conditions really have to do with the stuff that's in your community. There's a policy approach. We found that policy actually doesn't really affect entrepreneurship at all, interestingly. So, you know, going to your state government and saying we need to really work on entrepreneurship policy doesn't do very much. Facilitating conditions, believe it or not, helpful, but not critical. The critical stuff has to do with the ecosystem and the community down below. This is where we start to see when people start to work together and create relationships. This is where we start to see the entrepreneurial core really accelerate. So let me tell you the difference between some high and some low entrepreneurship communities and what this looks like in practice. And I have worked in, 150 plus communities across the United States, Australia, and a couple in Europe. I mean, it's really, you know, probably more than that. You see these things all over the place. And I did some formal research on this. We're still actually doing some research on this right now in northeastern Pennsylvania to understand it a little bit better. Hoping to bring the research to Texas at some point. But there are some general things that separate high entrepreneurship from low entrepreneurship communities. Let me give you some of the general patterns, and I'm going to tell you just a couple of brief stories that really drive this point home. High entrepreneurship communities, they like to feature entrepreneurs leading local business development processes. So they're out there showing what their entrepreneurs are doing, and they're giving entrepreneurs leadership opportunities, or the entrepreneurs are just standing up and taking those leadership opportunities on their own. These communities usually have institutions that are either founded by or focused by entrepreneurs. So it was either, these institutions were either launched by entrepreneurs, or they were sort of redirected or re-guided by entrepreneurs taking the helm. So, you know, if you have a mayor that used to be a small business owner, it's very different from having a mayor that came out of somewhere else in the private sector, oftentimes. They tend to have a cohesive and collaboratively created identity. This is entrepreneurs saying, hey, this is our flavor. This is our brand as a community. These are the kinds of things that we can leverage in terms of communicating who we are and what we stand for. It's very helpful in attracting customers too, and attracting more entrepreneurs to the fray. They usually have overlap between entrepreneurial and institutional roles, meaning that a lot of small business people are also stepping up and taking leadership elsewhere in the community. That happens a lot in highly entrepreneurial communities. It brings the small business voice to the decision-making table of the broader community. That's exciting. You see a lot of communities that are supporting collaboration and what we call co-opetition amongst entrepreneurs. So these are folks that, hey, it's okay to collaborate. Like, you know, let's not see ourselves as a bunch of rivals. You know, as I like to say, it's if you have a coffee shop, you got a coffee shop. You got 2 coffee shops, you've got a rivalry. 3 coffee shops, you got a bigger rivalry. If you got 10 coffee shops, you have a cafe scene, and people are attracted just for that reason. They come to your town just to get coffee, and it makes the pie bigger for everybody. So that's what co-opetition is all about. It's about competing together. Joint marketing, all that good stuff. High entrepreneurship communities make interaction amongst entrepreneurs ubiquitous and informal, and basically, and it's a way of basically getting folks to the table and saying, hey, it can be formal, it can be informal. I'll tell you a story about both types in a moment. Here's a biggie. This is a big, is this a big barrier in Australia? My goodness. Understand failure as an important part of the entrepreneurial process. It's the difference between my business failed versus you are a failure. Very hard for some communities to make that distinction, that entrepreneurs commonly fail as part of their entrepreneurial process. This is how they get stronger, bigger, better in the future. A lot of places don't understand that and don't tolerate it. It's a cultural issue. Most high entrepreneurship communities are open to a diversity of people, thought, and ideas. They like to try new things. They're open to new businesses. They're open to novelty in general. And therefore, they're open to change. And of course, they also have customers willing to support local businesses. Very important. Even if you're export-oriented, it's always nice to have folks that are willing to support, promote, and jointly market you at home. Very, very good stuff. Let's contrast that with low entrepreneurship communities. Here's what they tend to look like. Low entrepreneurship communities are places where non-entrepreneurs and or bureaucrats tend to lead local business development processes. These are folks that have no background in small business. And they might be more attuned to the wage employment scene and towards governmental incentives than they are to small business incentives. So they're not really thinking about small businesses. They're expecting small businesses to just do their own thing. They often have institutions that are run by staff with little or no background in entrepreneurship. So they have very, very little understanding of what the lifestyle is and what the needs are. I don't mean this to be overly critical, by the way. These are just features worth talking about. They may have a disjointed, disconnected, or very little sense of local identity. You'd be amazed how common that is, where folks have a community and it's just a great place to live, work, and play. You wouldn't believe how often we hear that slogan bandied around, but that doesn't really tell us about your community, its history, or its people. They have a lot of confusion over the roles of entrepreneurs and institutions. You know, they don't know what entrepreneurs are really supposed to do in their community or how they really fit into broader processes. They often times have formal social interactions which exclude or prevent meaningful interaction with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs aren't invited to important events. They're not brought into, they're not asked to serve on city councils, on boards. They're kind of just off in their own world. And entrepreneurs may feel similarly about the institutions. I heard one group in Pennsylvania say, "Oh, they're the muckety mucks. They're the bigwigs. They don't talk to us. We don't talk to them. They're above us." You know, it's very sad to hear. They might focus on failure as a personal trait, not as part of the entrepreneurial process. You are a failure and you're a failed business person, so you can't be trusted. After one failure, might not even be a big failure. They're hostile towards diversity of people, thought, and ideas. They don't want novelty or change, so they're path dependent, as we like to say. And they show less support for entrepreneurship as a career option. You know, you might even have people in, counselors in schools saying, "Why would you want to do that? You can get a job." So, I mean, this permeates entire local societies sometimes, where entrepreneurs are, as one town in Maine put it, they're the weirdos. They're the strange, the crazy people. When we look at entrepreneurs in that light, it's a cultural discouragement of being able to step up and do your own thing, and being able to live that kind of life. So what happens is that people either double down on getting a job and they never fulfill their life's dream of being an entrepreneur, or they leave and they go to a place like, Boston or New York or Austin or whatever's hot, whatever's happening. So let me tell you a couple stories just to illustrate this point. And I don't want to go too much longer. I'd really rather we get to a conversation. We could talk about what to do about this as entrepreneurs, because that's very, very important. What can we do about this? I did a lot of work on this in Maine, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. 3 interesting states. I've done a lot of work since then in Texas too. Some of it hasn't been as formal, but I see these patterns everywhere I go. Rockland was an interesting case. Rockland is up on the Maine coast, beautiful little town. Everybody says, "Oh, that's cheating. Of course, you got a lot of entrepreneurs who are on the Maine coast." But back in the year 2000, Rockland was a dirty, smelly cannery town. It was dangerous. There were gangs there. Right up the coast is a little place called Camden. They used to hold summits there. It's one of the most exclusive places on the entire Maine coast. They used to say, "Camden by the sea, Rockland by the smell." No. And what happened was that, a couple of stockbrokers from New Jersey, was a couple, they decided that they didn't want to do stockbroking anymore and they didn't want to be in the city. They always wanted to move to the Maine coast and buy a bed and breakfast and live that kind of life, be entrepreneurs. Well, they realized that they didn't do that well in the stock market. It was after the 2001 bubble burst, but they had a little money. Well, the only place they could afford was Rockland. They got there, they found 3 other inns that didn't have much business, and all of them were really angry that there was a new competitor in town. Yeah. And they said, "Well, wait a minute. We don't want to push our urban ways on rural Maine, but in New Jersey, when you get more people involved, it tends to, like we said earlier, it creates a scene, it creates a buzz." So they took the risk and they actually reached out to the other innkeepers. They said, "Well, let's get together and see if we can jointly market ourselves as," they created this organization called the Historic Inns of Rockland. Sure enough, they got everybody to agree. They started to promote each other. Business started booming because now when people went to one inn, they wanted to try all 4. They wanted to come back and try some more. So they kept kicking each other business. It worked so well that the stockbrokers then went and they started they actually said, let's take this to the downtown. And they ended up creating a downtown group for entrepreneurs. So they came together, it was a place for talking about small business issues and for help finding new ways of supporting each other. Pretty soon they were coming up with festival ideas. They were coming up with, coordinating their hours on the main street. Little spin-off groups happened. There was an art walk group. There was a gallery group, a restaurant group. All this other great stuff started to occur. Then one of them got to be the president of the chamber. And it was no longer a cannery person. It was now a small business person. Now small business was at the chamber table. They were able to successfully apply for a community development block grant. They redid their whole main street. Pretty soon, another member of their group ends up on the city council. Pretty soon, that original stockbroker that started the inn became mayor of the city. In only a decade, Rockland went from being a smelly, dirty, dangerous cannery town to accepting its first cruise ship as a pinnacle destination for tourists. It was a complete turnaround. And it all started with the entrepreneurial sector taking leadership to work together and find synergies across the town and compete as a team. Really, really exciting story. Rockland's great. If you ever get a chance to go there, just get as much lobster as you can. It's so worthwhile. That was one of the festivals they started, was the big lobster fest up there. Alma, Wisconsin, beautiful little town, less than 1,000 people, right on the Mississippi River. It's in western Wisconsin. Alma is the highest entrepreneurship rural town in all of Wisconsin. It used to be 80% abandoned. What happened is that entrepreneurs that were traveling up and down the Great River Road, typically from the Twin Cities, from Minneapolis and St. Paul, which aren't too far away, they started to notice these empty buildings, but the beautiful location. And they came in and actually started to, by word of mouth, tell their other friends in other towns that, they should come here and start a business. The real estate's cheap, and there's always people coming up and down the road. They're just not stopping. So what happened is they created a really unique chamber of commerce there. Now, I went to visit the chamber director, and he was a leather maker, made belts and purses and beautiful things. And I said, so when are your chamber meetings? He said, well, we don't have any. I said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, where's your Chamber of Commerce office? He said, we don't have one. I said, what do you mean you don't have chamber meetings or a chamber office? He said, oh, we just do business by going to each other's businesses all the time. I said, are you serious? They said, oh yeah, absolutely. We just stop in if I need something, or if I'm trying to plan. Believe it or not, they planned 2 major festivals that draw thousands of people that way, without ever having a formal chamber, they have a formal chamber, but no formal building, no formal meetings. Occasionally they have little get-togethers and whatnot. It may have changed since, but at the time, no, they became the most entrepreneurial location, small town location in Wisconsin, through just informally getting together, talking to each other, building relationships, and saying, let's compete together. What can we work on as a team? It worked amazingly well. That town is not abandoned anymore, anything but. It is a beautiful small business destination. And I think over 96% of the businesses in town are small, meaning that the only one that isn't small is the power plant. That's about it. Only large company they have there. And the government. That's all they've got. McConnellsburg, Pennsylvania came to high entrepreneurship through a different route. They're in one of the deepest, most remote valleys in the Pennsylvania mountains. It's like stepping back in time. Their attitude was that, we're an agrarian town. We can't get over those big, steep Pennsylvania mountains. Pennsylvania mountains aren't big, but they're really steep and they're very hard to get over. So rather than go to the next town, it's really inconvenient. They say anything that we want, we have to do it ourselves. So what happened is that they've always had small business people in positions of leadership there, because most of the businesses were always small businesses to begin with. But because the small business people were in positions of power, like the chamber director, et cetera, it was extremely easy. Small business were always, always, always at the table in McConnellsburg. So they had a very easy time getting together. One of the best things that they did is almost exactly what you're all doing right now with this series. They would get together regularly and have joint learning sessions. Really exciting stuff. They would learn together, network, and talk strategy. And that's how McConnellsburg has retained its ability to be a top small business destination within Pennsylvania. As for the low entrepreneurship communities that I've studied and that I've worked in, they might as well all be the same community. It's incredible how similar they are. Most of them were company towns. They have a history of what we call, industrial domination, usually of companies that are owned by, the corporation is actually owned remotely. So it's the owners live in a different city than the actual plant is in. The town is there because of the plant. And because of that, that meant that almost everybody that ever came to that town came there for that company. That meant that there weren't many entrepreneurial-minded people that were going there. Folks were going after jobs. And most of the people that grew up in that community grew up with a very strong culture of, you graduate from high school, you work for the company, and you retire after 30 years, and you get a pension, and your family's taken care of for the rest of their lives. If you do anything that deviates from that model, you are seen as a social deviant. I'm using the sociology term. You're a social deviant. And really, that is what, for the most part, entrepreneurs are. They are social deviants. They happen to be very positive social deviants, culturally speaking, here in the United States. But they deviate from the norm, and that's especially pronounced from people that are in these small communities, that are these small company towns. So there is always a sense of us versus them when it comes to entrepreneurs versus all the people that are supposed to be supporting them, whether it be banks, whether it be governments, whether it be chambers of commerce, other institutions that you would think would be supporting, local development organizations. You would think they would be absolutely passionate and enthusiastic for the entrepreneurial sector. They absolutely are not. And this happens very, very commonly in these kinds of places. And you see them all over the United States. So this is, I'm going to critique this model right here. I mean, there's something that I like to call the Silicon Valley late 90s model of startup success. And this is really to kind of drive home how this all works. This is a very individualistic model. We still see it a lot today. I'm not totally poo-pooing it, but it's you have an idea, you plan, make a business plan, you get the business funded, you launch the business, and then, we'll see how it goes. And oftentimes there's a fairly large failure rate for a lot of businesses. Part of the reason is that in communities where people are too disconnected, entrepreneurs are too disconnected from the local population or from their peer entrepreneurs, this is oftentimes what can happen. It's actually a source of risk because we've limited our own entrepreneurial awareness. So I try to really step away from this model and create a riff on this model. And this is very similar to what we hear with lean entrepreneurship and lean startup process, if you're familiar with that. So I'll call this new model of entrepreneurship development. It's where entrepreneurs and their community are in constant contact with one another. They can bring their ideas to the community. The community gives them early feedback, how to improve the idea, how to make the idea more relevant to the community. What you're doing is you're already coaching your customers before you even launch the business. Also, the community, their discussions, what they're into, what they don't like, what they like, what opportunities are there, what talent is there, tastes and preferences, that can inspire you as an entrepreneur, and you're never going to know about it if you remain too distant from the community that's happening around you. Because sometimes and the key is to interact with people who are different from yourself. That's where the most important information can be found. It's folks that have a different perspective from you. Those are the customers that you're not aware of, or that you may not understand how they think about the world. And there might be huge opportunities for you as an entrepreneur within that. So from there, we start small, we fail small. We start small, we fail small. Start small, fail small. Start small, it worked. Okay, we scale up. And by doing this, by being in constant contact with other people and trying little experiments locally, to see how they go, we can beta test ideas very, very effectively, and scale them up in a way that maximizes the community's benefit. And it also gets a lot of the risk out of the equation early when the stakes are very, very low. This happens extremely effectively in well-networked, very entrepreneurial communities on a regular basis. Sometimes it's not even the entrepreneurs doing their own business. Sometimes they're creating something for the community, like a festival, like a new initiative, or something the community really needs. So I'm going to stop the presentation and just, if I can figure out how to do it. Oh, let's see. I think I did it. Can you see me again? No?
Yeah.
You can. Great. Okay.
Okay. Michael, what I was wanting to do it's just a couple minutes to one. And some people are going to be needing to get off.
Sure.
I just wanted to open it up a little bit for anybody that might have some questions or comments about maybe how you guys feel about the Abilene entrepreneurial place. You know, do you feel like that Abilene, a lot of you are a lot more integrated into the larger scene in Abilene than I am, because I kind of operate in a retirement state, but a lot of you are more integrated into other activities in the city and so forth. You might want to give Michael a little bit of feedback as to how you feel about the whole Abilene. Is it a great entrepreneurial place, or is it a terrible entrepreneurial place, or somewhere in between? How do you assess that?
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
This is Kim one more time. Michael, that was great. Would you mind sharing whatever you did, the documentation, as far as the written documentation, with Michael, Mike Worth, so he can send it to us?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Okay. I would really like to study it as I'm listening again, when I can really focus.
Absolutely. No problem at all. And I can also look for a couple other reading materials that might be helpful and useful too.
Okay.
So
I assume your website, email, and stuff are on it, because I went to online to see if I could find it, but I didn't. So I didn't know what it was. So.
Oh, I'll send along all that
too.
information. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
On the presentation. Yep. Thank you.
By the rest of you, how do you feel about the Abilene entrepreneurial as an entrepreneurship place?
I've got to get off in just a second, but I wanted to make sure and thank Michael before I left. That was very informative and enlightening. I would say that what Mike is doing is a huge part of my encouragement as an entrepreneur, and I mean Mike Worth with this. The community is a huge encouragement, and something else that helps, and there's been a lot of interaction and networking coming through that community. Something else that helps in our area, Michael, is that we have universities that especially one is really highlighting entrepreneurship, and actually there's a piece in each of our 3 private universities where they do something to encourage entrepreneurship. And so programs through the universities have been really helpful also. And then I think the third component for my business is the Chamber of Commerce. And they have been just huge through the what I call the Chinese virus. That was a little political punch, but they have been huge in keeping people updated and instructed on how to all the different resources that you can go to survive and thrive during this time. So I've got to get off. I would love to hear everyone else's comments.
Well, thank you, Karen. It's a delight having you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks. And I agree. I mean, I can't say enough about what Mike's doing here. Some towns take these big, sophisticated, big money approaches to creating an ecosystem, and it's big meetings and lots of people getting together and whatever. Some of the most effective ecosystems I've seen are just simple convenings like this, learning together, getting to know one another. Mike, you do a brilliant job. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic. This is the way that really effective ecosystems start, because it's all about relationships. It's wonderful to hear that. Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. Appreciate it. Thanks.
I have a question, Mike. In the communities that you've seen, do you see the Chamber of Commerce encouraging startups? So encouraging people who aren't already kind of in business? Because it's my perception here, and this is just my perception, that there's sort of a barrier to entry to the chamber if you are not established. If you're not an established business. There's a bit of a barrier there, and if I don't know, it seems also if you're externally focused, you're also not as, I don't know, you don't see the value of being in the chamber, for one thing.
Sure thing. Absolutely. Yeah. If you're an export oriented firm, you know, maybe the chamber might not be the best value for you. You know, I faced a similar thing here in Huntsville as well. I mean, I'm 100% export oriented. I don't do any work in Huntsville. You know, so for somebody like me, being part of the chamber is sort of like, you know, and they're great. They're terrific. It's a good chamber here. But what's interesting is that not all chambers are the same. And I think there's an idea that chambers, if you have a chamber, it's going to be the natural place where you find small business people. And that's not always true. In a lot of places, the chamber actually sees themselves as being very much apart from small business people. They're working with established businesses. And the needs of entrepreneurs and startups are very, very different and sometimes very poorly understood by the chamber. I've also seen some chambers of commerce that absolutely, they are the small business champions of their town. One of my favorites was a town called Oil City, Pennsylvania, which is actually John D. Rockefeller's first headquarters. You know, the oil boom started in Pennsylvania before moving down to Texas. I think the first oil would be about 30 miles from there in the United States. So Oil City, and this is why we still have Pennzoil and Keystone, you know, and all these other kinds of, you know, all these other kinds of oil companies with Pennsylvania allusions. So Oil City was always started as sort of a company town, but it really transformed into a small business town. And that was largely the chamber's leadership that did that. So it just depends on where you go. You almost have to talk to the chamber and see what their priorities are, see who's showing up, and get an idea. And you can always reach out to the chamber and say, hey, how do you feel about having some special interest within the chamber just for small?
Yeah.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button and knocked my own self off. Then I had to go find the password to get back in.
Oh, no.
Well, sure, Michael, that you gave the exact answer I was looking for. I hear the majority of it.
Ron, I was just reading the cue cards you gave me. That's it. So.
Yeah. Ken and Sarah, how do you guys feel about the whole thing? Of course, Ken, you're not from here originally, so you've come in from other locations and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Sarah and I both, but yeah, I've got you know, I have quite a bit of familiarity with Abilene going back a couple of decades, but I'd never lived here. I moved here from Florida in 2015. And, you know, I've said before, and now it's probably almost 3 years, but the last 3 years have probably seen more entrepreneurial and new ideas and new development probably than in the previous 20 or 30 years. I mean, in my opinion, you know, Abilene was one of those towns that was just extremely stable. It grew at a, you know, a 1% maybe. Over the years, the population had basically stayed the same for decades, for the most part, and it was controlled by a few institutions, both you know, higher ed, banking, a number of individuals, one particular hospital, and those small group pretty much made the decisions for the city and what could come in, what couldn't come in, what could be developed, what new businesses could start up. But as those individuals in those institutions have aged out or passed on or what have you, there's been a freeing up of the ability for people to come in and start new businesses and do some things that you might see in larger cities, trying to create a higher quality of life. And there's been a lot of initiatives over the last few years to do that. Obviously, this COVID-19 has put a wrench into a lot of those plans, and obviously a lot of those initiatives and businesses are fragile because they're at the very beginning of that process. So it's unfortunate that has happened, because Abilene was really picking up some momentum as far as kind of changing its image and how people perceived it. I think in many cases we kind of thought we were 2 hours from anywhere, and in some respects that 2 hours from just about anywhere was becoming a positive as opposed to a negative, and I think it still will. This has kind of just been a temporary setback, but I think the city has made dramatic advances over the last few years compared to what's been done here historically. That's just my opinion.
Thank you.
That's kind of how I look at it.
So things are on the up and up then. That's great to hear. I mean, it sounds like, there's, I have a friend who likes to flip the script on negative narratives around smaller cities and rural areas, and you can flip the script from being 2 hours from everywhere to being 2 hours from anywhere to being right in the middle of everywhere. Honestly, and if you think about it, honestly, it's amazing how for me personally, Huntsville has ended up being a real nice hub for my business, because you could say, well, what's in Huntsville? Well, it's just a nice place to live, but it's very convenient to get to other places too. And a lot of the places that I utilize as consulting hubs, they're not big towns in and of themselves. They're close to a lot of other places where I can do good work. And for me, that's extremely important. So it's, I've always believed that smaller places, smaller cities, smaller towns have an absolutely immense opportunity for being able to say, hey, you don't have to be anchored to one town. You can have an entire region at your disposal and not have the high cost of living and the high cost of doing business that you have in a lot of larger cities.
Is it okay if I ask a question?
Absolutely, go.
Okay. So in some of those communities, especially the successful communities that you've seen, Michael, how big of a player was the access to capital? So for a lot of entrepreneurs, access to capital, they can go to a bank, but there's banks are less willing to take on a lot of risks that come with a brand new startup of a company. You've got to have some cash flow to be able to go get a bank loan. So with a brand new startup or a brand new company, how important is that access to different types of capital? How important is how did that work in those communities like that?
Okay, so I don't have data to back this up at my disposal right now. I'm happy to look it up, but I will say this based on my own observations. The number of banks in your town has almost nothing to do with the access to capital that entrepreneurs have. The attitude of the banks in your town have everything to do with it. So if you have two banks that are very open to working with and lending to small businesses, they're very comfortable with small businesses, that is a better situation than having 20 banks that don't want anything to do with small business lending. or don't understand it. You know, so there was a time when in research they were out there kind of counting banks and saying, oh yeah, you know, do the number of banks make a difference? I think the number of banks only make a difference to the extent that the more banks you have, the more likely there is to be one that is willing to work with small businesses. But you know, really, it has everything to do with again, relationships and you know, because I remember driving down the street. Oh, I can't remember if it was in Maine or if it was in Wisconsin now. I was having a conversation with a local entrepreneur and said, you know, look at this place. We are littered with banks, and there isn't a single one that will give me a loan. You know, so I mean, I think that's you know, really has to do with how the banks behave with their small business community and the nature of the relationship there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's access to capital is absolutely critical, and you know, I think also having local capital involved is really nice because it's always nice to be able to keep an eye on your investment if you're a lender, and it's always nice to be able to know you've got a neighbor if you have a problem. You know, it's not just going to some, you know, you could almost walk down the street and talk to your banker if something really, you know, if say a pandemic happens. Imagine that. You know, you could actually talk to your banker about this and say like, okay, you know, in a very, hey, I'm not just your customer, I'm also your neighbor too. You know, I know you're going through the same thing I'm going through. You know, how can we work through this together? Seems to be a very helpful thing.
Are there any more questions or comments from anybody? We've kind of held y'all. It's been about an hour, and I'm glad I can stay on all afternoon, but some of y'all don't do that. So before we absolutely close out, we'd love to entertain any other questions. And if you want to, there's a couple names I don't recognize on here, which is great. I'd kind of like to hear, you know, if you don't mind telling us how you found out about this little broadcast. That would help us a little bit. If maybe I found out through Facebook or LinkedIn or okay. Oh, hi. You have to unmute. There you go.
I know. I'm sorry. I peeked in because I'm a dear friend of Michael's from back in the day, and I saw on LinkedIn today, and then I invited another friend of mine, Chinea. She's here too.
Oh yeah, I see.
But we're in Ohio. I work at Wright State University near Dayton, and Chinea is a classmate of mine in a youth and community engagement class. She's from Nigeria.
Wonderful.
Chinea, can you show your face? Can you say hi?
Absolutely. Sorry, let me get that.
There you go. But we've been working on some service learning projects in community engagement. So I just sent the link to my whole class, and I was like, hey, Michael's doing a presentation. He was supposed to be here this spring to work with us, but of course everything changed really fast. So
you found out
thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. I happened to like pop on LinkedIn, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's in Texas, but we'll come. So it's great.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
I try to tell the speakers, Michael's, we've just been doing this since the pandemic online. Abilene Startup Community, we've been having lunch every Monday for the last 5 years at just different locations around town. And I just coordinate those times. And then once that everybody got kind of locked down, we went to Zoom. And so this is like our 5th week of doing it. And the last 3 weeks have been just kind of local personalities, local folks that, and so I told Michael, whom I had met him about 5 years ago at a conference, and I told him, I said, nobody knows you, so I don't know how many people will draw. So I would use it as a caveat, and I said, if you know anybody, ask them to join us, you know. So it's such a you guys saw this, and
well, Michael didn't invite us. We just showed up.
I got that. He's not very self-promoting, is he? But it's a delight to have you guys come in from Ohio, and this is terrific. Yeah, and with this technology thing, why this is not just about us locally in Abilene, and that's why I asked Michael to come, because he's talking about principles and things that affect entrepreneurs everywhere. So really cool to have you guys, ladies, to come in. Thank you.
Of course, it was our pleasure.
I can't tell you how
Janae,
much
I'm so
joy
glad you're
this
here.
brings me. Absolutely. It's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you.
Well, I'm glad you weren't too shy to identify yourself, because that's because I sometimes think, because we're just a
You're like someone's coming in our Zoom meeting. Oh no.
and we hope people do, because we think there's value, even with our local folks that are telling their stories or giving a little training or something like what Michael did. There's value in that for folks across the board. And so, and I send out invitations to people that I know across the country. And the other day we had one from the farthest we've had so far is Cody, Wyoming, but that was my sister's. So you guys get the next prize. I don't know, Ohio might be further than Cody. So I can't tell. Thank you for joining.
Michael, or Mike,
Yeah.
I just had another question for Michael. Michael, I didn't know, are you involved with the banking program there at the university?
With which program at the?
The banking program?
No, I was never affiliated with it. No.
Okay. Because there's a pretty strong little banking program at the university there, and I can't recall the gentleman's name that's run that for so long, but anyway, they've done a good job down there.
Yeah, the business school is quite good. They're one of the things, we were in some conversations at one point talking about how to sort of bolster the entrepreneurship program at the university, which was really, the program was really just a minor. And it was very occasional kind of, it was very, sort of very occasional, sort of sporadic classes, I think, at the time. And it's now started to build back up again. But, I was always very interested in getting entrepreneurs out there in the field and saying, how could entrepreneurs, as a community developer, when I'm going in, and let's say I'm not working with small businesses at all, I'm working with governments, I'm working with big organizations. We're talking about entrepreneurial strategies. We're also thinking a bit artistically too. I always like to say I train communities like you train jazz musicians. It's really not about, you never teach a jazz musician what to play. You teach jazz musicians how to play together and how to be creative within a context, which is what's so, in community work is the exact same way. So within that, there's a lot of entrepreneurial thinking that needs to happen, where we're not just looking at linear programs, like we're going to start here and we're going to design a path that's going to get us here. Entrepreneurship is very much about being adaptable. It's about pivoting. It's about trying new things. It's about taking risks. But it's not just this, the perception is that it's just this crazy risk-loving sort of a fit. I actually find most entrepreneurs that I'm around are very risk-averse. They know how to take very small, very calculated risks. Otherwise, they'd be wiped out right away. If we said, hey, I'm going to bet my whole house and a whole bunch is on something with no market research and I'm just going after a trend, most entrepreneurs don't work that way. They're very calculated and they're very, they take measured small risks. So when I go into communities, a lot of it is really just having this conversation about, hey, this is a way that you could be doing work too. You could be thinking about, instead of characterizing entrepreneurs as being these kind of risk lovers, and they're just, they're wild and crazy and hard to contain. No, take a look at the fact that they are strategic adapters. They're constantly thinking about new ways of doing things, and they're looking for new, I don't even want to call them risks, new strategies that have a little risk baked in, but are pretty strategic in nature. And they're going to structure and sequence them in a way that they're going to still be in business 5 years from now. Because nobody wants to just get crushed right out of the starting gate. So we take an entrepreneurial approach really also to going out into communities as well. And, so we were trying to get back to your question about the university. I think universities in general, not just Sam Houston, but others too, could be taking their entrepreneurship program, and I would love to see them just flooding a lot of communities with entrepreneurial students and saying like, hey, what could we do here? And now let's get them connected to the ecosystem locally. And who knows, maybe a few of them will actually turn up and start a business in places that are struggling not only to retain businesses, but youth as well.